Start.
Okay. All right. Hi, Susie. I'm Callie Johnson.
And I'm Jalen Blackbird.
And we're just going to start off by asking you questions about growing up on Walpole. So we'll start off with like an icebreaker type question. How are you?
I'm pretty good, although I don't know if I'll be too much help with the project because I didn't grow up entirely on Walpole Island. But I'll tell you my story as you ask the questions.
What did you do for fun on the island when you were a kid and a teenager?
Well, I wasn't here as a teenager, but I was 4.5 when they took me to residential school. I was standing in my front yard and a car just came by and made me get in the car, and they took me off to Sault Ste. Marie. So before 4.5, you really can't remember too much. I played outside. I like to play outside. There were a lot of snakes. My brother tells me about the snakes that used to be around Walpole Island. I lived right across from the school here, way back in the field. My house, my family's house is in the field. So there's a lot of trees there, so I imagine there was a lot of snakes. And the road wasn't here by the school at that time. It was back by my house. And so there's a farmer's field between the school and my house, and there was a road way back there. So I don't remember much. My mother made baskets, and I used to be in the room where she made the baskets, and my brother and I used to play just like the kids were tonight. We played tag and hide and go seek and things like that.
Did the island look any different when you were younger?
Well, once I went to Shingwauk, which is in Sault Ste. Marie, I hardly ever came to the island again. I would go to Detroit. But when I did come to Walpole to visit family, I used to notice that there was no electricity. People used to use coal oil lamps, which are lamps with a glass cylinder on top, and then they put the fuel in the bottom part, and they lit it, and that's what gave you light in the nighttime. And so with no electricity, of course, there was not television at that time. You played cards, and the light probably would only be about this round. So the light didn't go everywhere else in the room, so you couldn't really do anything. You probably couldn't even hardly read because the light wasn't that bright. But everybody went to bed early, and they got up early, and so life was really different all the way around. And I would just come maybe for a day. So I would notice that in the springtime, the main road wasn't paved, that it was all mud. And there was just 2 tracks down the middle of the road, and when people had to pass each other, one of the cars usually got stuck because the road was really muddy. And there weren't a lot of cars here then, and everybody walked everywhere. So it wasn't something I was used to. At our residential school, we had electricity, we had central heat, so it was a different life for me. I noticed that there were no screens on the windows, which I couldn't imagine now because I don't like bugs and mosquitoes and stuff like that, and they came in. So I was glad I only stayed here during the day.
What were the houses like when you were growing up?
Well, I was shocked when I came to Walpole when I was 16, and I was taken by a friend to his aunt's house, and they had a pump in the house, and I don't know if you know what a hand pump is, but you see it in campgrounds if you go camping. The water comes out of the ground, of course, and then there's a metal pump, and you had to pump your water like this. You had to prime the pump first before any water would even come out, and then then the water would come out. So people had to, when we stayed with friends, they had to draw bath water, and all the kids had to take a bath in the same water. I'm sure you girls wouldn't like that now if you had to do that. But it was really a different life, and cooking was hard. I remember once when we stayed with someone and they didn't have any, of course they had no gas stove or electric stove. They had a wood stove. Everybody had wood stoves at that time. This was in the 40s and 50s. And so at one time I had to go out and even get little sticks and small pieces of wood just to make a fire to warm the water to cook. It was what I thought was a very hard life. So I really didn't live that kind of a life. I lived in the city after I got out of school.
Did your house have electricity when you were growing up?
No, there was no electricity, just the lanterns that I talked about. A lot of people had flashlights, but I'm sure batteries cost a lot of money back then too. And they used a substance called coal oil. It smells like kerosene. A lot of people heat with kerosene nowadays if they don't have central heat or something's wrong with their furnace. No electricity. They didn't get electricity till later on, 60s probably.
Where did your family go to get food or supplies that you needed when you were younger?
Well, my mother talks about when I was little, they only went to town, which was Wallaceburg, for two things, and that was sugar and lard. Lard being a product of the pig. We didn't have pigs. We had cows and we had chickens. Everybody had chickens. They killed their own chickens to have chicken dinner on Sunday. And that's quite an experience too. My granddaughter thinks that real chicken comes from McDonald's. She doesn't know about chasing a chicken around and cutting their head off and putting it in hot water and taking the feathers off before you can even start cooking it. But she thinks real chicken comes from McDonald's. So other than that, we had everything in the garden. My grandfather had a garden and grew vegetables. We had fruit trees, and my husband talks about his family also having a garden, and they had what is called a root cellar. And a root cellar is a big hole in the ground, and in the fall time when you harvest your fruits and vegetables, you can put them in that hole, and then you cover it up with straw, and in the middle of winter you dig it out, and it's just like you took it out of the garden. It's still fresh and it didn't get spoiled. So that's how people, and we ate chicken a lot, and we had eggs, and we used our own vegetables. So we really didn't go to town very much.
What responsibilities did you have when you were young?
Well, when I was young and in my home here on Walpole, I don't remember any responsibilities. But once I got to Shingwauk, I didn't have any responsibilities for a couple of years. But after that, we always had a job, and it rotated. So some of my jobs, and my daughter said something to me the other night. I used to peel potatoes, and I had to peel 120 potatoes when that was my job. So she said when she was peeling potatoes for 5 of us, she couldn't imagine peeling 120 potatoes. But I'm a good potato peeler. I can still peel good, really fast, and I don't waste anything. And I always say I'm the best potato peeler in the world. But I had to cut bread too. There were 120 kids in our residential school, and they each got 2 slices of bread. So that was 240 slices of bread I had to cut. So I went right after school and started cutting for the evening meal. So my job rotated. Sometimes it's scrubbing floors, and sometimes it's doing the cooking. Sometimes it's washing or mending or ironing. But I did just about everything.
What were the waters around Walpole Island like when you were growing up?
Now that question I don't think I can answer, because when I used to come and visit, I just came over on the ferry, and we would visit down the main road, which is called Tecumseh now, and I would visit my family and then go back over the river. So it looked just like it does now.
Were the natural resources and wildlife more abundant when you were younger?
Well, I don't know about the wildlife. I'm sure it was, but I didn't pay attention to it. The natural resources, my mother always warned me never to lose my membership on Walpole Island. She always felt that having a home here and living here was very important, because we lived in the city and we had to rent apartments from other people, and it was very hard for Indians in those days to rent apartments. There was a lot of discrimination, and so they wouldn't rent us apartments. So She always made sure that I knew her rule, which was marry someone from Walpole Island and don't lose your membership.
Where were the deer nests when you were growing up?
And I don't know the answer to that question either. I didn't even know about hunting till I got married. And in a residential school, they never let you go out, the girls go outside of the yard. And so I didn't even know anything about deer hunting, pheasants, or anything like that. After I got married, I lived in the thumb of Michigan, and that was an abundant place for pheasants and deer and turkeys and things like that. But I myself didn't ever go hunting.
Did your family speak Ojibwe or English when you were growing up?
My mother always spoke Ojibwe. She never liked English, and when she would speak to me, she spoke to me in Ojibwe. And I spoke Ojibwe when I went to the residential school, and I lost it there, and I never regained it. My mother, to her deathbed, always spoke to me in the Ojibwe language, and she would say, "Do you understand, Susie?" And I say, "Yes, I understand." So I could understand it, but I couldn't reply back to her in whole sentences. So I feel they say that it's in there in your head. Educators tell me that, and maybe someday I'll be able to pull it out. If I do use a word or words or phrases, I can say them in the way that the old Indians used to say the words. So it must be true that they're back in my brain somewhere.
What were the biggest challenges when you were growing up?
Well, I think I had to stay away from my family, so there was no one to help me in time of trouble, like that little boy that just got hurt his toe there in the library. If that was me, there would be nobody to come and help me fix it or take care of it. They didn't care if we cried, and so the challenge, I guess, was just to survive without any adult help. When you consider that there's 60 girls on one side of that school and maybe 2 people to take care of all of us, there really wasn't enough staff to go around, and so we had to learn how to take care of ourselves. And I've been doing that ever since.
Do you have any weird facts about your childhood?
Weird facts?
Yeah.
Oh, my whole life is weird. People, I go out and speak at schools, and they think some of them know the story. The teachers know the story of residential school, but they like to hear it in person, so they think it's weird. To me, I never really talked about it. I retired at 55 years of age, came back to Walpole Island, and that's when it started being of interest to me, residential schools, and that's why I couldn't understand why people would say, "Why didn't you tell us you were in residential school?" And I'd say, "Why? Nobody was interested in it." So they think it's weird. But for all of us that went, it was just a way of life. And so some of the things that we endured, I suppose, are weird. The way we think and the facts that we learned and the things that we do now, we learned in residential school. We can't seem to give them up. So I think in a way those are what you would call weird.
What was your most cherished family tradition?
Well, I didn't really have any with my family. See, what they don't teach nowadays is that residential schools wasn't just one generation. My mother went to residential school. My husband's grandfather, great-grandfather went to residential school, so there were no traditions. The traditions that they used to have were gone. They were forbidden to use them. And so they had to make up their own. But one thing that I latched onto at residential school was Christmas. My mother never really had Christmas. And so we used to have Christmas at the school, and they gave us presents, and they gave us a sock filled with fruit and candies. And so I kind of really latched onto Christmas, and I made a big deal out of it all the while my kids were growing up. And usually they believed in Santa Claus till they were about 10 years old. Then I had to tell them, and they were really disappointed that I told them. So I tried to do that with my grandkids, and not so much with my great-grandkids, because the old-fashioned Christmases are gone, so I just had to let that go.
Do you have any special sayings or expressions?
Well, one that my husband and I use, and I used it first, and he picked up on it, but in my day, if somebody had a nice car or somebody dressed up to look nice or just whatever, they had a nice hairdo, we would just say, oh, you look hux today, or the car looked hux. That's H-U-X. And so when I started using that word, my husband really laughed, and because it was a special word. You didn't use it every day like people use amazing. I mean, everything can't be amazing. Amazing just, means really different. And that's the way we used hux was, oh, you're really looking hux today.
Are there times in your life that you remember more vividly than others?
Not really. I use my brain all the time. It's in motion all the time, and I remember stuff. I'm 81 and I can remember stuff that other people can't remember. So I really, I have special times. My vacations or doing something that I never thought I would do. I went to Switzerland to go to the United Nations to talk on residential schools. And that was kind of special that I represented all the residential school survivors.
All right. So we have questions about wild horses, but do you have anything?
I do have a couple because when we used to come, my mother's sister lived on the Snai, and so her husband had a big farm back there, so there was corn there all the time, in the summertime growing, and the horses used to run through those plants, and they were always running. They were really strong, and you could hear them coming, and they had their own paths, so they would run every day on their same paths. And I heard that they ran all the way from back there to High Banks. So the last house that's on that road now, I don't know if it's called Snai Road, but that's where my aunt lived. And so I would see the horses when I came. But I didn't really, I hear stories of kids my age trying to corral them and ride them and things like that. I never did that. They looked too big for me.
Why do you think they took the horses away?
Well, the farmers, which they were all Indians at that time, they said they ruined the crops, which that was their livelihood. But I think that it was that time when everybody was just trying to change America and United States and Canada from what it used to be. I guess it's like civilizing the horses like they civilized us. And I was with somebody who was in the group that rounded up the last of the wild horses, and he didn't tell me where they took them, but I was sorry I hadn't asked them, because a lot of people have asked me that question. Well, what did they do with them? Because they did come over with the Potawatomis, which was in 1837, so they'd been here a long time. And I was sorry to see them go. And we have pictures of them along in front of our house down along the river. So they used to be all over the place, and it's a shame that we don't have them anymore.
Do you think they should have taken the horses away?
No, I don't. But then the government comes along and they do whatever they want to anyway. So we almost didn't have a say, and we didn't have a say back then. We had an Indian agent who told us what to do and what we could have and couldn't have. So he was the governor of Walpole Island.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to some school questions now. Did you attend school on the island, or did you go to residential school?
I went to residential school, and I attended the first year. I didn't be in any grade because I was only 4.5, and so I started the year after that, and I finished 12th grade while I was in residential school.
What was school like when you were growing up?
Well, we had to work half a day and we had to go to school half a day. So working included sewing, making our own dresses, mending the boys' socks, washing the clothes, ironing the clothes when needed. So we worked half a day. It would be like you guys working in the home for half a day and then going to school for the other half. And we had reading, writing, and arithmetic just like you have. So that part wasn't any different. I did learn how to play piano. I liked music, and when I got to high school, the music teacher wouldn't ask me any questions because he thought I was a dumb Indian who didn't know anything about music, but I actually did. So there was a misconception among educators that we weren't capable of learning anything or doing anything. So we didn't have the opportunities that kids have nowadays.
Did you get to see your parents during your time at school?
Not until I was there about 4 years before I got to come home and visit with my parents. So after that, I really didn't have a family life at all.
What was it like when you got home from the residential school?
Well, when I got home, I was only 16, so that makes it younger than, most people that go out in life and say go to college or working. So when I came home, I lived with my parents, and I didn't like it there because all of a sudden they're telling me what to do, and I had never had them tell me what to do before. And so within about 3 months, I planned on moving out of the house. And I did have a good job. I lived downtown Detroit, and I found my own place, and so I lived by myself, away from them from 16 years on. So I never really had a family to speak of. And I enjoyed being alone. That was the first time I was alone, totally alone, in my whole life. My own room, and I could do what I wanted to do, eat what I wanted to eat. So I liked it. And I had a job, and I worked hard.
Now we've got some questions about your adult life.
Hmm.
Where did you work for most of your life?
Well, I had a couple of jobs before I started. When my kids grew up a little bit, that's when I started full time. So I worked for the State of Michigan Department of Social Services. I worked there for 17 years.
Do you have any children?
I have 6 children, and they're all in their almost 60 now. So I have grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
In the past, what was it like raising children on Walpole Island?
Well, I didn't raise them on Walpole Island, but I never really wanted to come home because I knew there was racism here. My youngest daughter, she wanted to come home. We were going to move home, and she wanted to come home first because school was starting in September. And so she came home and lived with my mother and went to school at WDSS. And of course, things were a lot worse then. If there's still racism, I know, because I've worked with the school all these years. But my daughter went to school and she saw how racism was, and so she told me after about 5 days, she says, I can't go to school here. I want to go back to Michigan and go to school where I was going to school. And so she moved back and graduated from her school there. But what was the question? What was it like raising kids? Yeah, it was hard enough. I mean, when you have 6 kids, that's, the war, Vietnam War was going on. Things, my husband was in the military and he was away, so you could say I raised 6 kids alone. And we always lived on a tight budget, even when he was in the military. He was in the military for 14 years. And we always saved our money, so we spent it wisely. We always had a new car, always had money for gas, always had money for food. People used to laugh because we saved our best meal for the last day of the month, the day before payday. So it was hard raising kids, and in those days, my husband's pay was $5,000 a year, And I know that some people earn that in 1 month now. So things were different. My kids, I think they like being a family of 6. They're about 2 years apart, and they helped each other, and they counted on each other being together, and they're still that way now. They stick together, we support each other and help one another in whatever way we can, and whatever when someone has to do something, they can always count on their sisters and brothers.
Over time, how have you changed the way you look at people in life?
I'm getting very pessimistic. Do you know what that means? I used to always be upbeat and think that I could change the world the harder I worked, but now I'm not so sure. I know that if you work at it, you can change some people. What I work on is the racism and the bigotry and things like that, and which is inbred, seems to be inbred in a lot of people. So my calling is to try and work on that, and it's a hard job to do, but I see the change, and I see the change in your age group. I see that you're able to look at things and be not so judgmental, but be accepting of one another. And I can also see it on the non-Aboriginal side, where the students are willing to hear the stories about us, hear our history as well as their history, and to hear about residential schools and what happened to us. So I have hope that your generation is going to change the world.
What did you like most about your life?
What I like most about my life is that the Creator led me all the way. He has opened doors for me to do things that I never thought I would be able to do, and He has provided for me all my life. And I can't say that it was always steak on the table every night, but there was always food on the table. We were never cold in a cold house. We never wanted for anything. And so I feel like I feel like everybody is put on this earth for a reason. There's a job that you have to do, and most people don't find it right. If ever, they sure don't find it right away until they're adults and they start thinking about how fast life is going. So I believe that people should find what they're set here to do and then try and accomplish that. And I've been very fortunate in being able to see where the doors have been open for me and also shut for me when I have to quit doing something. And yet there's another door open. So that's what I like about it. I don't have to figure anything out. It's all figured out for me.
What do you think has stayed the same about you throughout life?
My optimism.
What have been the most important experiences in your life?
I think my children. I think that when you have children, and you can't waste any time when you're raising children. You have to start at it the minute that, even before they're born. I used to take my vitamins. I never used to do anything that would hurt my children while they were still not born. And once they're born, that's where your time should go. You shouldn't be going off to bingo or whatever else, shopping. Some people have shopping addictions. So I believe that raising a family and keeping your family together in a good way is the most important thing. And I think that my sense about that started because of residential school, and so I think that's what I worked at most of my life. And our family's still very close.
Now we have a few questions about the future. Compared to today, what are the biggest differences that you've noticed on Walpole?
Well, I think that people have had more money, but they want more money. I think we inherited the greed from the Shugnosh people who landed on this North America and took the silver and the gold and the buffalo and all the other resources that were here. And they've only done it within like 200 years, 300 years. The first white man came up the river in 1660, around 1660, you could say. So that isn't very long ago. And so when you think of how the trees are all gone, if you had an aerial view of Walpole Island, you'd see, or the whole area, like of Ontario and Michigan and all the way to Toronto. Walpole Island is the greenest part of that whole area. So we've kind of preserved our way of life, and that's a good thing, because things are going to be hard to get. You know, we have a wood stove in our house, but we've never used it, and we put it in just for the hard times that might come. So I think that the greed that we've inherited from the settlers here is not a good thing at all.
How do you think we should try to make the Ojibwe language more popular and preserve it?
Well, I think that first of all, there's a lot of people who don't think that's important. They're not going to learn it. And I've heard somebody say, I'm not an Indian because, I forget what their reason was. They were Indian, First Nations. That's our language. And we had it, and yet we lost it through residential school. And so I believe that to regain it, we have to be a family. Each one has to be a family again and talk the language. Like me, we say our thanks for our food in Ojibwe. If you know other words, like come and eat, sit down, come on in, do you want water? Everybody says bish, learn the whole phrase. Just learn a little bit at a time. And then the more you use it, the more it's going to become natural. And so I think that's what we all have to do.
Who do you think has more freedom, our elders or our generation today?
Well, there's different kinds of freedom. I know I lost my freedom, but I come from a generation where we roamed the whole area. I mean, my husband's grandfather used to walk to Oklahoma, which is in the middle of the United States, to register as an Ottawa Indian, and then he'd walk back. You can't do that now. So we had the freedom. There was no border. But when you talk about freedom that you young people have, it's a different kind of freedom. You have President Clinton said the World Wide Web, it's an information highway. And it is. When I ask a question, my kids press on that little thing and they have the answer for me within a minute, even shorter than a minute. So when you have that kind of freedom, the whole world is open to you. I mean, I like traveling, but I don't want to go to Europe. I would just be satisfied to travel in the States. And so I think that freedom of knowledge is something that isn't appreciated by younger people, because they're interested, what are you wearing to school tomorrow? What are you doing? Instead of really finding out what I would call more important stuff. But that's that's teenagers. And maybe as they get older, they'll value knowledge.
What do you think that we should do to make Walpole Island a better place to live?
I think we should be kind to one another. We have a lot of lateral violence here. I don't know if you know what lateral violence is. It's where we hurt one another. We do that by the way we talk about each other, hidden and unhidden. We can just, when we say, you don't have to do that. Like I had kids lie on the street in front of my house in the summertime when they swim, and they lie on the asphalt to get warmed up. So I went out there and I told a kid, I says, you shouldn't do that. A car's going to come by and hit you. He says, you don't have to tell me what to do. And I thought, I'm interested in saving his life probably, but he thinks I don't have the right to tell him what to do. Instead he could have said thank you. And I thought, what would his mother say if he did get killed? Would she be crying? So I have a different viewpoint on some of those things, but I think that we should learn once again how to be kind to one another and be helpful.
What year were you born?
1936.
Where were you born?
Walpole Island, right across the road from here.
What part of the island did you grow up on?
Well, I grew up right there, so would be the middle of the island, middle of the Walpole Island it's called, yeah.
Well, that's all the questions we have for you today, Susie.
Okay. Well, thank you
you.
very much. You did a good job. I don't know what he's doing, but it looks like